That's the scholar was. Wait a minute. He said that I say it.
He's got some stuff on here.
Oh, and then I just started drawing the feet. And that's the amazing thing.
You know I've been playing that. All right, let's go ahead and get started with a word of prayer. We have prayer requests this afternoon. Yes, John.
I have a niece that has a friend of hers and we're praying for. They found some lumps in her breast. They went in there and did a mastectomy to both of them. And they found 4 more in there that they shouldn't have been. And they had to do that. She came back home for a week and she fell. She's back in ICU. She's got blood clots on her legs. She's got more problems with that, and also she's got the flu.
What's her name?
I got it right here for her.
All right, anybody else? Somebody look that up? Phil?
I'm preaching to the youth tomorrow, so just do that.
Thoughts?
Janie Folkman.
Janie, okay.
It's from Baytown, Texas.
Well, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are thankful for an opportunity to just stop before we start our day and just and pray to you. I pray for this woman named Janie who has got a lot of medical things going on. Diagnosis sounds pretty bleak. We just pray that they can remove all those masses and pray that those oncologists can put together a plan to best meet her medical needs, whether it be chemo, radiation, or all of the above. Pray that you would heal her blood clots as well as her flu. So we pray for Dylan and others who work and serve in churches. We pray that you would give him clarity and a word from you to share with the youth tomorrow. Be with us as we continue our study in the book of Numbers. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so a couple of things to sort of bring to our attention. I know, thank you, Nathan and John, for asking me about the annotated Bible readings. And so what I'm looking for, I'm going to upload a graphic, but I'm not looking for like just extensive, exhaustive annotations. Simply, it's up to you. It really is up to you. It's underlining verses, putting cross references in the margins, bracketing or circling things and pointing them back. I don't need you to go like over the top because it's going to take you forever. Like as some of you have been doing it, you realize it may take you 30 minutes to do a chapter, depending on a select chapter. I'm not looking for that level. Okay, you're welcome to do that level, but I'd like for you just to read through the first 5 books, right? So the way that's going to work, particularly for you in this room, is toward the end of the semester, you'll bring that Bible, whichever you're using, and you'll just flip to several pages. I'll look at a couple from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. You select your best pages. I don't care what they are. I just want to see them, that you've annotated them well. After class, if you want to stick around, I'll show you some of mine in here. For the Flex students, you will just simply take photographs of those select pages. So roughly 10 pages, which is technically 20, right? So you lay it flat. This is one picture, and you're going to do 2 from each biblical book. So you can pick your best ones. Best way to do it is to then insert those photos in a Word document and then PDF it and then upload that as a document. And that's what I'll use for that assignment. Really, this is just to help you. A lot of times when I'm teaching you and I say this text is from here or this is back from there, that's not here. Like that's notes in my Bible to then help me understand. But I've asked you to do it without a Bible you've used, because then I want you to see it afresh. So that red Bible I bring in, that's what I've been working through personally this semester and hopefully all summer. And so it's never been written in. So I'm working my way to add all my notes because this one has 20 years worth of notes in it. And so I want to be able to see text afresh. And so that's kind of the objective behind that. If I remember correctly, if you have a moment, let's look at the syllabus real briefly, just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page. Let me apologize. Takes a minute. Any folders? Do I have you submitting components of your paper? You don't know, thesis? No, okay. I just want to make sure I didn't. But you are more than welcome to sit down with me, email me, let's set up a time. If you're flex, I can make a phone call so we can discuss kind of a thesis, sort of how the direction you're going. I have a new resource for those of you doing Golden Calf. There's a commentary by Eugene Carpenter that I don't believe we have in the library, but I had a friend of mine who owns it scan in those sections. And so it's an evangelical commentary, so I'll upload that as well. And I've got to make sure I include a bibliographical entry because he forgot to put like the title page, and so you know what it's from. So I'll make that available to you as well. So what we're going to do this morning or this afternoon first is we're going to actually look through the assigned readings on the theology of numbers. I required 2 different articles. Okay, so I had you read Elmer Martin's article as well as Walter Harold's. Okay, so Walter, I think Elmer Martin is still alive, though he is very aged. Walter Harrelson has passed away a little about 2 decades ago. Harrelson taught for years at Vanderbilt, then went to Wake Forest. He was the founding dean of the Divinity School at Wake Forest. And they come to the topic of theology of numbers very differently. Okay, and so which one would you like to start with? Because one I'm going to shred to pieces for a variety of reasons. But which one would y'all like to start with? Hopefully you read. Let's start with Harrelson. All right, let's do Harrelson. You can imagine that's the one I'm going to slaughter. So just sort of an overview, in your own just kind of thoughts as we look through it. What were your overall thoughts as it pertains to his understanding of theology of numbers? Starters, I didn't think it was a theology of numbers. I thought it was like I didn't extract much of anything. It was of much value. I did highlight one section I thought was pretty good. So we'll walk through it pretty thoroughly. If you've had biblical theology, and some of you are currently taking biblical theology, the second essay by Elmer Martins was very much like biblical theology. He walked through themes, but then what I found really helpful was that last section where the New Testament builds on those themes. So that's like a classical biblical theology model. So hopefully that was beneficial to you. So if you have Martin's open, it says in the first paragraph, the procedure chosen for this present study is that of an analysis of the structure of the book and the treatment of the major themes which it contains, which I don't think he met his thesis and purpose of the book article. So under Roman number 1, first page, the story jumps in. He says from a structural perspective, he gives you just general information. It's 38 years, kind of talks about the 1-month timeline to complete the tabernacle from the book of Exodus 40, verse 17. And then he describes how the book of Numbers chronicles from the completion of the tabernacle, they don't enter the promised land. So it's the same paragraph where it's Joshua and Caleb. So that's just sort of like overview stuff. He does do a good job on the second page discussing how Israel was stubborn and rebellious from the very beginning, which is very true, which is helpful. And then he says, nothing remains to be said about a time of faithfulness in the wilderness, which is also relatively true. That doesn't mean there weren't moments of faithfulness, but certainly the overarching view is that they were not faithful. And then he approaches the laws that are found in Numbers very differently than Martin's does. He talks about that those were, he didn't call them this, but essentially they're functioning like Mishnah or Haggadah, I'm drawing a blank, I can see the word, Haggadah laws, where as a situation comes, here's the law, as a situation comes up, the law needs to be explained more to deal with this situation. Therefore, they caveat the law or expand the law to accommodate whatever is happening in the wilderness. That is not what Harrelson argues for. All right, so what I want to hone in on specifically on page 27, so that would be page 4, he said, these were, in fact, years of wandering, of testing, of occasional faithfulness and repeated faithlessness. Yahweh was forming his people. I think that's probably the best statement he makes in the entire article. All right, so now we're going to start critiquing it. He then starts to argue that the book of Numbers is a priestly document recorded in the exilic period about the wilderness experience that may have really happened or may not have happened, and therefore it shifts the historical context of the book. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? There are several weaknesses to that argument, but let's start with a good first one. What is a weakness to that?
We're in the wilderness.
So the first red flag for reading any scholarship that violates general hermeneutics principles that you were taught in interpreting the Bible. Who wrote it, to whom they wrote it, when they wrote it, and what's the purpose of the writing. So the working hypothesis / belief is that Moses is responsible for most of it, if not all of it. The audience is the Israelites coming out of Egypt, but also those subsequently that will read it. The date, that's up to dating the Exodus event, but it's going to be 1400 or 1220-ish. Okay? The problem then is to say that this is to be interpreted in a exilic audience means it has a different meaning than the intended meaning of what the text says. For example, I did not cover this in class this semester because some things just aren't worth bringing up to you. Okay, so we have, all of you are familiar with the theory that and it's a theory and it is not mine, that Adam and Eve are not real humans. That's a metaphorical argument, right? So Adam means man, Eve means living, Eden means paradise, Cain means pointed spear, Abel means fleeting, which we covered in class. But the outer workings of that, for example, so like in N.T. Wright's works, and it's a New Testament author. When N.T. Wright says in one of his books that Adam and Eve being kicked out of the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3:22, it says he took them to the east of the garden, kicked them out so that they could no longer eat from the tree of life and live forever. Y'all familiar with that text? But 2 seraphim at the gate. That is symbolic of Judah and Israel being kicked out of the promised land by God for their disobedience at the hands of the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Now, I know, because I know the theories, that N.T. Wright does not say Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is primarily the works of P. But that conclusion is a argument of P. Does everybody track? When we read, I would hope when you read Genesis 1 through 3, it's paramount. Bo's working on the image of, you are working on the image of God, right? Mm-hmm. All right, and so are you. So it's paramount on the Imago Dei. It's paramount on sexual ethics and the sexual ethics of ordering of man, woman, and procreation. Y'all familiar with that? Chapter 1:27, chapter 2, two become one. It also is paramount for the doctrine of original sin. In my theological paradigm, the T, it's the first letter of a very important flower. To then jettison those seminal theological foundational components to then simply say, you Christians who read it too literally, you're missing the real point, that it's a caricature of Israel and Judah being sent into Babylonian captivity. You're now replacing classic Christian doctrines that trace back, 2,000 years with an alternative reading. Does that make sense? Okay, so you don't know that because you're still relatively learning this documentary hypothesis and why it is actually quite toxic, why it actually shifts or moves the goalposts. Because you're now saying a text doesn't really say and mean what you think it says because I'm more enlightened than you. It's really talking about the exile. But yet he never showed evidence of how that could be. He just simply said, this is the priestly document, and this is how it would have been read in the exilic period. Number two, you can never know how any piece of literature was read at a period of time that you can't go back to and find writings during that time telling you how to read it. It's like Matthew reading Harry Potter and me telling him that when he reads it, this is how he's going to read it. I don't know how Matthew's going to read Harry Potter. He probably won't read Harry Potter. Would you? You're pagan.
Some space.
So he makes this argument that them being tested in the wilderness is really the priestly sources writing how the Israelites are being tested in Babylonian captivity. I fully agree that potentially exilic Israelites could read back a historical account of the wilderness and say, they are like us right now. That's not disputed. I think that's probably possible. But to then say that the they was never real, that it's reconstructed to create some kind of narrative for the exilic audience is fallacious and just wrong in my book. Is that clear enough for y'all? Like, I know I've not been very critical on things, but when I was reading, and he's a great scholar, by the way, he wrote a really good book on the Ten Commandments. And this is not good, but you need to read it. All right, let's keep going. Let's look at page 28. He says the last paragraph, the last 4 lines, the essential point made by the census list is that the vast army of Yahweh is under Yahweh's orders, which is true. It will be victorious only when he proposes the victory to come. And then what does he tell you about the census? That it's actually Davidic in origin, not Mosaic in origin. Okay, so now we're just moving. Okay, we're reading it from a post-exilic theological paradigm, and then we shift back over to the monarchy, and he's just moving us back and forth as he sees text fit in categories or periods of time that he feels like best fit where those would be received.
Just to clarify this, he's taking the census as not, is it the total number of Israelites from the Exodus to the
He says,
David, or is it
says it's during the Davidic and monarchical periods. And then he says on the next page that the numbers are more for a theological purpose. But then he comes back later and says, or they may have been the real number. Who knows? I'm like, oh my gosh. Also, have you noticed there's just no footnotes throughout this whole article? It drives me insane. John.
Why do you think he's doing this way? He's bouncing around.
The easy answer, John, is critical scholarship, which sounds like a negative term, but it's not. It's like people who study the Bible academically when Wellhausen wrote Prolegomena to Israelite History, Moses functionally died as the author in 1787. Excuse me, 1878. He functionally died. And so there was a to use a pastor's term, there's a unhitching of biblical truth to biblical authors, and truth is found by those who study it and reconstruct its truth. And so really what ends up happening is scholars then tell centuries of Christians, the way you've read scripture your whole life is wrong. And we are the enlightened ones because we understand history, archaeology, ancient Near Eastern context, and we then position texts in different time periods that fit best the way we read ancient literature. And it's also part of this jettisoning the divorce between church and academics. Hey, Josh, you're in the room. Is that fair? You've read a lot.
Yeah.
There's a divorce. A divorce happens in the academy. They disconnect the Bible and faith from Bible and academic inquiry, even if they are people of faith. Those of you who took biblical studies, intro biblical studies, remember you read that article that was called "Should Biblical Studies Be a Secular Discipline?" And he concludes, yes, and yet he tells you, I'm a Christian, I'm a Protestant who teaches a Catholic institution, and I conclude this should only be an academic inquiry. That is foreign to everything we believe. That is foreign to what I believe. That is foreign to what every biblical studies faculty member I know on campus. That is foreign to them. So your question may be, why in the world are you having us read it? Because the library is filled with thousands of volumes of the same kind of people with the same kind of mindset. And you have to be able to navigate that slowly but surely and be able to push back.
Where do you think we're gonna be at in 20 years from now, the way everything's going with the scientific ways and the
I
new
think
things that they're coming up with? It sounds like they're almost gonna change the whole Bible.
so. That's a good question, John. So we've kind of reached this point in biblical studies. So source criticism, documentary hypothesis, deuteronomistic history, which y'all have not learned. You take that next semester, you'll learn that. They've run their course. Documentary hypothesis has now run its course. It's been over 100-something years. People are now doing different things. So then they create different methods, form criticism, traditio-historical, canonical, and then they run their course because you've written all you can write about from that perspective. And so scholarship is almost cyclical in many ways. They will slowly return back to methods that we have shot and killed that no one does source criticism anymore, except for the really old guys at SBL and ETS, right? Those are the only ones who do it. Well, then we're slowly seeing scholars in their 40s now coming back 40 years later, using the same methods that they shot and killed 80 years ago.
Do you think that with all this new stuff that's coming up with that, relook at the whole Bible again and decide maybe it's wrong or modify it any kind of way? In your opinion?
I'm sure it won't seep in here or any of the other like confessional institutions, like Protestant confessional institutions. The scholarship is just all over board. It's cyclical though. Let's look then on page 32 and following. He then starts the first paragraph. He says, thus the tradition in short reflects a mythologization of the wilderness period. Keyword. Like the moment you read that word in any writings you read, there should be like red flags going off immediately. Okay. Another term with that one is just putting the prefix DE on the front of it, demytholization of it. And that means all miracles are not provable, therefore to be denied. This is a different term. This is a term that means to read the ancient text in light of other ancient Near Eastern mythological contexts. Now, the word myth by our standard, right, is a false, fake narrative. That's not what this means. This means This is to be read in light of how a civilization creates its history. Sometimes it has components of truth, but oftentimes it carries with it exaggerations. Does that make sense? So an example of how this works. I'm now 49, and this part of my life is dead. Like to talk about high school lore is sort of silly at some point. At some point, you grow out of talking about high school lore and accolades. Does that make sense? So when I was a senior, we went undefeated in high school football. I started for 3 years on varsity. We were ranked fourth in the state. Our tailback, played at University of Michigan, won national championship there, won Rookie of the Year in the NFL. We were good. Like, we were real good. We beat people's brains in. We beat most people's brains in. And we beat two teams by 7 points each. But who's counting? Who's counting the 11 victories we had? Because we went undefeated until we didn't. We lost. Hey, we didn't lose. We got skull drug. We got beat 48-6. Yeah. By a team, believe it or not, who was quite on the same page as us. We got outcoached. But in my little brain, the way I work, it was actually the best game I played in my entire athletic career. So it was the worst game we ever played, but it was actually my best game. And so what do I usually emphasize? It was my best game. It was not, we got destroyed. But then as I kept getting older, everybody kept getting bigger. So our fullback was 6'5" and 270. Our tailback was 6'3" and 225. And all of our linemen were, no, I'm exaggerating the truth. That's an example of mythologization. What is real? I played football. What is also real? We went undefeated in the regular season. But I'm also leaving out components that are for what I want you to believe about me, the athlete. I leave out the details that are less pretty. Like the only sack I gave up my senior year was in that last game to a first team All-Stater. All right, so we choose to elaborate. It is still very true in some regards, but it's also embellished and fictitious. In that football story, when he says this here, that's what he means. Does everybody understand? Look at it. This reflects a mythologization of the wilderness period in which it becomes the equivalent of the paradise story of certain circles within Israel. How he knows that, I do not know. He transcends my ability to understand that. Probably under prophetic inspiration. What lies behind this kind of reading of the wilderness period? ? We suggest, who is we? Because you wrote the article. I got fired up when he put we. I'm like, Walter, do you have multiple personalities? Apparently so. We suggest that it has its origins in the prophetic reaction to the kingship of Israel. What? How? I am kind of intelligent. Kind of, a little bit. And I don't know what in the world he's arguing for. You're now telling me the wilderness experience has prophetic undertones that is be to understood in relation to the kingship. I'll address it in that. And their priestly retinue of the authority and function formerly assigned to the covenant mediators, the confederacy of the 12 tribes. You don't know what that means, but the confederacy of 12 tribes is a code word for the book of Judges. That's a phrase from a book from 1956. And it's all about the book of Judges. He just now tells you, without telling you, that the wilderness experience is after the book of Judges, and it's a critique of or some kind of analysis of the monarchy. And for the record, this is probably the only liberal thing you've read this semester. It's wild. This is out of hand. The Balaam cycle. How you screw up the Balaam cycle, I don't know, but he did. Page 30. I'm fired up. He's not live. I can talk to him. In Numbers, a few poems are found which are likely to be as early as the wilderness period itself. Oh, so there are parts, but he's not going to tell us why they are. Next to the order of antiquity and the cycle of poems dealing with Balaam's curse of Israel on order of Balak, king of Moab. And everybody see that in this next portion. The 4 poems may be assigned to the period of the early monarch. Do you know why he does that? He's going to tell you why. Because the narrative framework within which they stand may be considerably later. It has been pointed out, however, that Balaam, as depicted in both narrative and poems, bears all the marks of a typical priest diviner of the ancient Near East in the 2nd millennium. Make that make sense. He just tells you everything that God does in the biblical text actually dates to the period of Moses. It's the 2nd millennium BC. Well, it concludes because there's a reference to the scepter and the staff that it has to be a reference to the monarchy in the 1st millennium. That's all in 2 sentences. He contradicts himself in 2 sentences. Don't track me. I know, this is a heavy piece. I apologize. That's where he talks about the scepter of the star being from Jacob. Clearly has to be about David, blah, 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 whatever. And then the last part, he then moves into dealing with the 3 elements of Numbers traditions provide a partial picture of the way in which the basic theme guidance of wilderness start to be elaborated. He talks about not even Aaron, Miriam, or Moses himself stand to test the faith of wilderness, and Aaron is replaced, and Moses dies, and blah, blah, blah. The only other good thing I found was the very last sentence he wrote in the entire article. The last 2 sentences I thought were pretty good. The last paragraph reads, Moses, Israel's greatest leader, must depart from his people. No grave monument is conceivable which would adequately mark the significance of him who lies buried there. Moses, in life and in death, belongs to the world. He talks about, I believe Martin's is the one who references that God buries Moses. If you go read Deuteronomy 34, it says that Moses is buried by God in the Moab with an unnamed tomb. Think about all of the different people who are buried and their bones are brought with them. Joseph's bones. Aaron, we know where his, it describes every one of them, but not this one. And he's right. Moses is the most important person in the entire Old Testament. This morning I was teaching New Testament survey, and the author of Hebrews, chapter 3, verses 1 through 8, makes a really important distinction that Moses was a really great guy. In fact, he was the great man of faith in the Old Testament, but he is insufficient compared to the supremacy of Christ. It's almost like God knew. I'm being tongue-in-cheek, by the way. It's almost like God knew that if they knew where Moses was buried, they would worship. And so God intentionally buried him where they would never find him, because their attention needs to be on God, not the great patriarch Moses. And I know he's not a patriarch, but he's dead. Everybody understand? And yet, I know that to be correct because the author of Hebrews tells me. Apollos, my position, because Martin Luther argued for Apollos, argues that Christ is supreme to Moses. Moses was a mediator, but only an earthly mediator. Christ is the eternal mediator. And so I found that to be really beautiful, kind of segueing off these articles where he brings a really good point. And then Moses really isn't mentioned a whole lot in the Old Testament after that. The acts of God working through Moses are mentioned, right? When I brought you out of the land of Egypt, when I did these things, when I gave Moses the law. It's never what Moses has done. It's always about what God has done. All right. Either way, trash article. Trash article. I don't even know if there's really theology in there.
It's his theology.
It's his theology. And I define theology drastically different. All right. So let's go to my boy, Elmer Martins, which, by the way, just sounds like a cartoon character. Elmer Martins. Great, brilliant evangelical scholar. Written a lot on Old Testament theology, actually. So that's why you can see his article carrying a great deal of weight and value. He's a Mennonite. So he's almost Baptist. So, well, almost Baptist. All right, so he, very similarly to Harrelson, argues the literary structure of the book, based on geography, frames the theology of the book. The first part, okay? But then what he does is he does what I would define as biblical theology. He's not doing Old Testament theology, he's doing biblical theology. Old Testament theology is allowing the text to then give the narrative, the theological narrative as it flows. Biblical theology, he is identifying themes. Everybody understand? That's more of a biblical theology approach, not a bad approach. You can tell that he has a different disposition. He says under sovereign guide of lawgiver, which is what I had on this board last class period, that Yahweh is suzerain over his people. God has taken charge. What is God as suzerain? Authority. Right. So in the ancient Near East, there are these Caesarean treaties. Okay. So we'll use a bad analogy. Let's just say hypothetically, America takes over a certain country north of North Dakota. It's Canada, specifically. Canada. Right. Okay. We, the United States, are the suzerain. We tell them, you no longer have your own constitution. You no longer have your own military. You have our constitution and you have our military. Your military must pass our stringent military requirements. And then we hand them the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, all that stuff, and they have to sign on. And then we tell them, and then we say, if we go to war, you have to go to war. And if you break any of our agreements, here's a list of things that's going to happen. We're taking all your maple syrup. Taking all of your hockey players, and they're going to all play on our hockey team. We don't, right? We take back Toronto because it's technically New York State, right? But in all reality, we tell them, if you do these things, we enact punishment to you. Taxes, we remove your governors, and we replace them with people who are sympathetic. They do it again, it gets worse. That is the book of Exodus, by the way. Who is the suzerain? God. He gave them the law. He told them, you obey the law, no questions asked. You want to know why? Because I brought you out of Egypt. That's enough. Same way when my kids say, why do I have to obey you? I say, because I'm your dad. That's essentially what God says. When he says, I brought you out of the land of Egypt to this location, then that's why you're going to obey me. And so in the book of Numbers, he is functioning as the caretaker, but also mandating their obedience. And then points out that he is with them or with the ark, and they're wrapped around him, and his glory is always there, which then he asks a great question. How can they be so lack of faith with God in the middle of them? Which is a great question. Which is also a great point ministerially. Years ago, I had a friend who, one of his friends committed an atrocious sin. Atrocious. Won't even talk about it. Years ago, way before you know. Years ago, not even years ago. And I went to him and I said, are you okay? He goes, no. So-and-so did this. And I'm just floored. I knew him. And I probably could have been a little kinder. I'm a little kinder now. I'm definitely probably almost mature since your brains quit maturing as an adult male at 45. We're almost there. I looked at him and I said, why are you surprised? He said, what do you mean? I said, why are you surprised that he did that? Because I know him. I said, no, I don't think you understand my question. Why are you surprised that anyone would ever do anything that horrible? We are all capable of being that sinful. And what keeps us from doing that is Christ. Well, he was a believer. I know. But there was only one perfect person, my man, Jesus. And I said, today is a hard lesson for you to learn. The book of Numbers, God was in their presence for 40 years. To put it differently, while we're in class up here, the tabernacle is downstairs outside of the cafe with God in the middle, hovering over the mercy seat, visible by fire or pillar of smoke, and yet they still found ways to be as disobedient as possible. And he was physically there. We should never be surprised. Believers today act sinful when God is not physically present with the tabernacle with us. And so I'm far more gracious to people who are sinful now, because there they are walking with the glory of God with them and still found a way to do Numbers 25. Got there yet? El Bell Fior text, that's a doozy. It tells us that God is provider and chastiser. This is a great quote, line 4. God is not capricious, is not a capricious God about whose expectations Israel needs to conjecture. God's will is made known. The desired pattern of behavior is plain. It then goes on and says, incidents on the journey, however, depict God who is is not unconditionally benign. Page 56 is probably the best quote of the whole thing. First full paragraph, starting with the word though halfway through, though not spelled out in Numbers, a governing understanding is that God is solicitous, loving, committed toward his people, but he's at the same time committed to justice. He is not intolerant of evil. He cares for both people and justice. God's anger, then, is not the opposite of caring. His anger and caring are parts of the same coin, love. Like, that's a t-shirt. You're a parent. That's true. There brings no joy in punishing your children, but you do so out of love. No matter the punishment. If you spank, that's fine. If you ground, that's fine. But it's out of love. Now, they don't ever understand. Trust me, I got kids that don't understand. They don't understand. They didn't understand Sunday when they got in trouble. But I told them the reason I'm doing this is so that you learn how to fix that type of behavior. So, really good theological insight. He then talks about the next section, embodiment of holiness and sin and forgiver. It talks about the role of purity is beyond just hygienic, which is the book of Leviticus teaches us hygienic, but now the book of Numbers is saying, no, it's not just about that. It's about being in the presence of God and being good. He then talks about how God reconciles, gives you examples of Moses' intercession, Phineas' intercession, and then God being kind and gracious. And then he talks about other little key things. We are going to talk about the messianic components of this text from the biblical text, but it's worth noting the Numbers does contain a beautiful messianic text. And then I think that's about all I want to talk about. Do y'all have anything in here you want to talk about? I did find something I learned new, how he argues the book of Numbers sort of parallels the Ten Commandments, and he then has examples of them breaking the Ten Commandments. We'll cover that when we get to Deuteronomy, how the Ten Commandments are then expounded upon, or provide, to use the good preaching term, there's expository sermons on. Thou shalt not steal. Well, what constitutes a steal? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's a bunch of laws saying what is stealing. So from chapters 12 through 26, there's examples of what each Ten Commandment means in practical terms of law. And then the theological summary is pretty straightforward. I don't need to read that, but it's pretty solid. All right. Any questions? By the way, when we get to Deuteronomy, we're going to go through a lot of those articles. Most of them are pretty much down the middle of the fairway. One of them is Rory McIlroy's 18th tee shot that went into the trees, so you need to be ready for that one. Fair warning, you watch it was so in the trees, the TV couldn't even capture it. It was just something right. Only one article was over the trees, and I'll try to bring it back into the fairway. We'll see. If it's playing like I play, it's from one side to the other side. It's kind of played back and forth between the trees. All right, let's grab our Bibles in. Next time when we have reading, I call some of you to interact. We're going to begin at chapter 10. Actually, we're going to begin at chapter 11. We're going to deal with the rebellions. We're going to walk through them. The fun thing about this is it almost feels like you're reading them like they're happening pretty quickly, but it covers, remember, 38, 39 years. Okay, so Numbers chapter 11. In chapter 10, verse 11, they leave Sinai, so we're no longer at Sinai. From Exodus 19 all the way to Numbers 10, verse 11 was 1 year. So now we're moving. Verse 1. And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. When the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them, consumed some of the outer parts of the camp. Then the people cried to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire abated. So the name of that place is Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. Taberah just means burning. All right, so typically, who is on the outskirts or the outer lying parts of the tribes of Israel? So you have the tabernacle. So this is the tabernacle that's moving forward. You got all the people, different locations. But on the outside, the fringes, who's out there? The unclean, the lepers, the elderly, the maimed, the crippled. Cindy just made a frowning face, like, that's poor sweet people. What did they do? They burned. They burned. And I'm not saying that the wrong people burned. Maybe they were the ones murmuring. So it's not God just being like, oh, Dylan and we know Lawson's the one who's going to murmur. We're not going to just burn off everybody over there.
That's good. That's good.
I mean, all those prayer requests about a certain location on campus and you're murmuring.
I think that's merit.
Okay. Well, how do we interpret fire from heaven?
Thunder, lightning.
Thunder, lightning. Look, you know when I realized it was thunder and lightning?
When you read your Bible.
About 9 years ago. I always just thought it was pillar of fire coming down, and I did some reading on it, and it was like more than likely thunder and lightning. And I'm like, here I am, 40-something-year-old dude, still envisioning God just casting down like dragon fire from heaven.
But that's much cooler.
It is much cooler to think about.
When I think about Elijah and the prophet, I don't want to think about thunder.
I don't either. I don't want to think bolts of lightning. I want just pillar of fire out
Fire
of
tornado.
Don't
A fire name.
Thank God.
I can't
It's
even
just-
see I just picture fire.
That's all.
Have you seen the Prince of Egypt? You know, the fire tornadoes?
I did not watch
Fire.
I did not watch the Prince of Egypt because it opened with Moses horse racing Ramesses II.
That's in the text. It's
I turned it off. When I saw Ramesses, right?
It's in the book of Moses.
You gotta lock in.
I feel like we need a biblical studies, what's the name of that course? It's special topics of biblical studies, John. You know, we have that in the book, in the manual, in the course catalog. I think we should have one, Bible and film, so we can watch all these horrible films that y'all want to watch.
You ever heard of the show The Promised Land? It's like The Office, but
It's good.
it's actually really good.
It's good stuff.
I should watch that.
There's an Egyptian dude who can't the Israelite, and he's like trying to hide from him.
It is.
It's funny. It's actually really good.
We watch it on campus.
Yes, yes, truly you
It's
can.
clean, it's clean.
Last day class.
It's.
Last day of class, last 5 minutes of class.
First of all, I'm not giving up a day in Deuteronomy to watch. It's not.
Day and numbers. Day and numbers.
Chapter 11, verse 4. Should have brought up the Bible film. Now the rabble was among them, had a strong craving. Now this was me. They're hungry. They're hungry. And the people of Israel also wept again and said, "Oh, that we eat the meat from Egypt. Oh, remember the fish that we ate in Egypt. For nothing, the cucumbers out, hard pass. Melons, hard pass. Leeks, maybe. Onions and garlic. But now the strength is dried up and there is nothing but this manna to look at." I would have kept the manna to dip it into the oil, into the olive oil and garlic, you know? Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance like that of bedlam. The people went about and gathered it and ground it into meals and beat it in mortars and boiled it in pots and made cakes of it. And the taste of it was like the taste of cakes baked with oil. That kind of sounds good. I'm just saying. Sounds like Friday nights when I make pizza dough, to be honest. It kind of sounds good. When the dew fell upon the camp at the night, the manna fell with it. Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, every man at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord blazed hotly. Moses was displeased. Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant? Why have I not found favor in your sight that you do lay the burdens of all this people upon me?" That's a fair question. That's a fair question. Did I conceive all these people?
By the dead.
Probably not a good comment. Probably, Moses may have not thought well through that one. Did I bring them forth? That you should say to me, "Carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries the suckling child to the land which I did swear to give your fathers, their fathers." Well, let's get a little tested here. Get a little tested. Where am I to get meat for all these people? Not a good question. God says, "Got you. For they will weep before me and say, 'Give us meat so that we may eat.' I'm not able to carry all these people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will deal with me, fuss with me, kill me at once. If I find favor in your sight, that I may not see my wretchedness." The Lord said to Moses, "Gather for me 70 men of elders of Israel, whom you know to be elders, the people and the officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand with you there. I will come down and talk with you there, and I will take some of the spirit which I put upon you and put it upon them, and they shall bear the burdens of the people with you, that you may not bear it yourself alone." And he said to the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, 'Who will give us meat to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall not eat 1 day or 2 days or 5 or 10 days or 20, but a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you, because you have rejected the Lord who is among you and who have wept before him, saying, Why did we come forth out of Egypt?' But Moses said, 'The people among whom I am numbered 600,000 on foot, and you have said, I will give them meat, that they may eat a whole month. Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them to suffice them? Or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together to them to suffice them?' And the Lord said to Moses, 'Is the Lord's hand shortened? Now you shall see whether my word will come true or not.' So Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord. And they gathered 70 men of the elders of the people and placed them among the tent. And the Lord came down in a cloud and spoke with them, and took some of the spirit that was upon him and put on the 70 elders. When the spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, but they did not do so. There's a parallel narrative analogy to this text. Y'all know the narrative analogy? Does everybody know what a narrative analogy is? Like another sequence somewhere else in the text that is both historically true, but it's a literary parallel with this one. It's in the Old Testament. turn, if you will, to 1 Samuel.
Saul's ordination, or the appointment.
Yeah. When Saul, excuse me, use the right word, be helpful. When Saul prophesies among the prophets. Y'all familiar? Let's see, where are you? I think it's chapter 10. It says the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him in verse 6 of chapter 10. It says in verse 9, and he turned back to Samuel. God gave him another heart, and all the signs came to pass that day. And when he came to Gibeah, behold, a band of prophets met him. The Spirit of God came mightily upon him, and he prophesied among them. And when all who knew him before saw how he prophesied with the prophets, the people said to one another, what has come over the son of Kish? Saul also among the prophets? And a man in the place answered, and who is their father? Therefore it is a proverb. Is Saul also among the prophets? He also does it again later in this book where he prophesies. And so it does appear that God at times takes his spirit and sort of spreads the wealth, for lack of better terms. So that's a narrative analogy there. But back to this text where we're dealing with this, God then sends it in verse 31, sends forth a wind from the Lord, and he brought quail from the sea and let them fall beside the camp about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other, around about the camp and about 2 cubits above the face of the earth. People rose all day and all night and all the next day and gathered the quail. And he gathered 10 homers, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp, while the meat was yet still between their teeth. Before it was consumed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord smote the people with a very great plague. Therefore, the name of that place is Kabaroth Hatavah, because there they buried the people who had their cravings. That's wild. That's like a fat person's nightmare. You get the buffet and you get to chew it and not swallow it, and you die. Why?
My head did.
So the outcome of chapter 11, how do we interpret that in light of God saying, I'm going to give them food for a month? Is God teaching Moses something here? You're listening to their complaints, and you're now complaining to me instead of just being faithful and obedient. I'll give them what they want, and I'm going to make them so full, they're going to be so sick if food comes out of their nostrils. Better yet, I'm going to kill them. He does. Yeah. We had fire, lightning, preferably fire in my imagination. You're burning off all the lepers and all the unclean and the elderly. And now you have people, so clearly it's not all 600,000, but it's some. And then they bury them in the land there. Chapter 12, for Miriam. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman who he married. Uh-oh. He married outside the lineage. He married a Cushite woman. They married that Cushite woman, and they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Uh-oh. Don't you do it. Has he not spoken through us also? Lord had heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, of course he was, more than all the men that were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and to Miriam, come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. And 3 of them came out. You know good and well when he called them out, Miriam was like, what's he want from me? Why am I being asked to go to the tent meeting? What have y'all said? I am a woman. I am not permitted to be in that space. Uh-oh. Only Aaron and Moses go in there. She knows something's up. And the three of them came out, and the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the door of the tent of meeting and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. He said, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is entrusted with all of my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, and not in dark speeches, and behold the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against your servant Moses? The anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And when the cloud removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous as snow. Why is it important that God removed himself first?
Can't be in the presence.
Can't be in presence of something unclean. It just gave her the full body leprosy. Aaron turned towards Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. I feel like that's an anticlimactic verse. And he turned and he's like, holy snap, you are covered in body lesions. You are unclean. I'm running for my life. And Aaron said to Moses, oh, my Lord, do not punish us because we have done foolishly and have sinned. Let her not be as one dead of whom the flesh is half consumed when he comes out of his mother's womb. Moses cried to the Lord, heal her, O God, I beseech you. But the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut up outside the camp for 7 days. You know, Moses was like, do you not remember the last time this happened? God, you called down fire, man. You consumed them all. That's my sister. I love her. She saved me off the riverbank of the Nile. So they told me.
Save the resource.
What did you say? So what?
So the piece of
Oh my gosh, Matthew, you are going to have to say 5 Hell John Madison. So Miriam was shut up outside the camp 7 days. The people did not set on the march till Miriam was brought in again. After that, the people set out Hazroth and encamped in the wilderness of Paran.
So, what, Miriam, Aaron, and Moses inside the tent of meeting when this happened, or were they standing outside?
Sounds like they were just outside of it. He called them to the edge of it, and then he cursed her with leprosy. Why is Aaron yet again not cursed?
He's good.
Which
He's got
God elected me. He's predestined.
God.
That's the earth.
Who are you, old man, to question God?
Why should the clay hold back to the bottom?
Some things I've taught too well. He's just good, you know, makes him say that about he's predestined.
Is it because he can't?
It's great. How the guy builds a golden calf and worship to it and rise up and play whatever that means. And then he goes behind his brother's back and try to get some power, and his sister gets cursed.
It was just all written down wrong later. The redactors didn't fix it.
I'm gonna put you on mute the rest of the
This is critical scholarship, Jim.
Budding liberal scholar Matt Craft.
I had you read on that so that you are prepared to read the nonsense that you will come across. Not adhere to it, man.
This is what you sent me. Remember?
I don't. Check my sent folder. It's gonna be a new sent email. It's gonna say you need to repent. Chapter 13. Lord said to Moses, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I give to the people of Israel. For each tribe of their father shall you send a man, every one of them, later among them. And Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran according to the command of the Lord. All of them men who were heads of the people of Israel. And these were their names from the tribe of Reuben, Shammah, son of Zakur. Again, this is where this doesn't make sense to try to read this in post-exilic period because it's telling you their name and their dad's name. And typically, most of these names are quite ancient. They're not latter names, older names. That makes sense, like closer to us. Then you have, where did I leave off? We have from the tribe of Simeon, Shaphat, son of Ori, tribe of Judah, Caleb, son of Jephneh. From the tribe of Ishkar, Ilgal, the son of Joseph. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, son of Nun. What's his other name?
Joshua.
Joshua. Okay, so Joshua's name was Hoshea. From the tribe of Benjamin, Palti, son of Zoph. From the tribe of Zebulun, Gadiel, the son of Sodi. From the tribe of Joseph, that is the tribe of Manasseh, Gadi, the son of Susi. The tribe of Dan, Amaliel, the son of Gamaliel. The tribe of Asher, Sethur, the son of Michael. And from the tribe of Naphtali, Nabi, the son of Bophsi. The tribe of Gad, Guiel, son of Maki. These are the names of the men who Moses sent out to spy out the land. I would go a step further and tell you this has to be historically true because why in the world would Moses include their names? Like he could just simply have said, I sent 12 spies. And we have the determination, did this really happen? But he went details, name for each tribe, which corresponds with the first few chapters of the census. And then it says in verse 16, and these are the names of the men Moses sent to spy out the land, and Moses called Hoshea, son of Nun, Joshua. So now we're introduced briefly to Joshua, and now we see this is called like forecasting. He's mentioned him, and then he changes his name to Joshua, which, by the way, when names are usually changed, it's because God is going to do something in their life. But we don't know what yet. We're going to find out later. Question.
Could the fact that we see that Joshua has Hoshea's name, and we see in Exodus says that written down as Joshua, would that be just more evidence to Mosaic?
I think it's more evidence of Mosaic authorship. So you know then that it's coming later. Yeah. There's a smirk on your face.
This
You know,
is-
I got a hand raised.
It's a genuine question.
Hand raised for either mute.
So how do people who would date this way later, like exilic, like you, how would you argue against the historical nature of the names? Because, I mean, something that comes to my mind is David's mighty men, right? Why would these names be included? Maybe these are names of some of the people of the mighty men that are known at the time. Because like it doesn't include all
Yeah.
the mighty men.
Yeah, so that's the interesting facet to some of their arguments. So they'll argue the narrative is so you're not taking Israel the Promised Land. Okay, so there's a literary approach called historical fiction. Does everybody understand? I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out historical fiction. So historical fiction is the names are, and possible some of the events are real, but they also are partially literary masterpieces. Literary fiction is the wrong term. They're literary creations. So the P people will argue that the story of Numbers may have a semblance of truth, but it's really fictitious. But when it comes to the names, they'll say those are probably names of ancient peoples. So it's kind of like you're speaking out both sides of your mouth, if that makes any sense. So you're, in one sense, they'll say, I mean, even Harrelson's argument says this portion seems to be archaic. This portion doesn't. And so it's hard to get around names, particularly. That's a really key point. Like it's hard to get around because you see sort of development of names because names have meaning, names have tied to different verbs or deity names. And so they just sort of gloss over them is the biggest way they get away with it. It's to me, it's academic dishonesty.
Nitpicking.
but we're not dealing with people who are doing this for the church. They're doing it for academics. Yeah.
It seems like there's a spot in every tribe of Israel. Why is that like this?
So they had they had the census, and they would mention the leader, like the elder of each tribe. And so now they're going to send a representative to then spy out. This text is directly related to the book of Joshua. And so they're going to go spy out the land. And from this spying out, we're going to quickly see, we all know the answer. I guess Joshua and Caleb come back with a positive report. But that also impacts, if you look back up to their tribes, the tribe of Judah, who is their representative? Caleb. And who gets greater favor in this narrative sequence, Joshua or Caleb? Caleb. Caleb is going to get, as we move through, Joshua becomes Moses' underling, but Caleb in the text of Numbers gets more accolades, but we know Joshua becomes more powerful. What is missing is the Levites in this group. Okay. And so when we move forward, it says Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, which then means they're near it, right? To spy it out. Yes.
What is the meaning of like Hoshe?
God saves.
Well, how's it different?
God's salvation. Same. It's just same constant value. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and instead of them go up into the Negev. So next semester you'll do take Israel Promising, you'll do maps. Something that's missing in all my classes. You need to know the geography of Israel. So if you can vaguely remember your map, you got the Dead Sea here, and you got Jerusalem 27 miles west of the Dead Sea. And then where far at the bottom is the city of Beersheba, looks like Beersheba. That's the Negev that runs from there to Arad, A-R-A-D. Those two cities, that's the Negev. And it's beautiful rolling hill country. And then as you get toward the Dead Sea, working your way up, that's called the Shephelah. So think of like the foothills in Chattanooga or northeast Alabama. Not near that big, but it's moving these foothills into the plateau. So they go to the Negev. They go into technically where Arad is and go up into the hill country, that's the Shephelah, and see what the land is. And whether the people who dwell there are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, fortified cities, and whether the land is rich or poor, whether there's wood in it or not. Be of good courage. That's an interesting phrase. Joshua 1 says it 4 times. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit from the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and spied out the land in the wilderness of Zin, which is north of the Red Sea, to Nehob, near the entrance of Hamath. They went up into the Negev and came to Hebron, which is, where's Hebron? Don't know. It's in Judah, but what do we know about Hebron? There's something important about Hebron. David was king of Hebron first for 7.5 years. So they come into Hebron, and Ahiman, Shai, and Talmah, the descendants of Anak, were there. And so if you've seen the new David movie, I'm familiar, the cartoon, you got those weird-looking Amalekites. And there they were, and Hebron was built 7 years before Zon in Egypt, and they came into the valley of Eshcol and cut down from there a branch of a single cluster of grapes that they carried in a pole between 2 of them. It's big grapes. So if you ever go to Israel, they sell these little statues of men carrying poles with this ginormous grape cluster hanging between them. And they came, brought with them also pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster which the men of Israel cut down from there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. They came to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh, and they brought back word to them and all the congregation. They showed them the fruit of the land. They told them, we came into the land which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Yet the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. So this is then pushing you back to a narrative analogy to 1 Kings. Who is Saul supposed to kill? In chapter 15. He is supposed to kill the Amalekites and their king because of the way they treated the people in the book of Numbers. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. So they brought to the people of Israel an evil report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are the men of great stature. Verse 33. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them.
Was having before the flood.
So we got to breathe.
I don't know how
Chronology works where you're from. So Genesis chapter 6, we do have to go back there. I know this feels like forever ago there. Verse 3 says, the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, but his days shall be numbered to 120 years. By the way, how old is Moses when he dies? 120. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. So commentators will tell you, number one, either they're lying in the Numbers text because they're trying to convince the people that the great giants of old are still there, or they're telling the truth. John.
I've always wondered this question, how in the world did they carry those fruits from there to there 40 days and they stayed fresh or anything? You know what I mean? They didn't have ice boxes enough to keep them in.
Yeah, I mean, you could pick them before they're ripe. That's what they do with bananas in like Africa. They cut them while they're still green, let them ripen, and it takes a while.
Oh. Yeah. Okay.
Or just spray them with some pesticides, what everybody else does.
Jocelyn just had it on.
I think they just cut them while they're early. So when chapter 14, real quickly, I know we got 1 minute. And then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said, would that we have died in the land of Egypt. Oh, would that we had been died in the wilderness. Why does the Lord bring us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? We'll stop there. But it's not going to go well. We're getting close to my favorite chapter where snakes start biting people. Good day.
Moses makes it hard. Thanks for it. That only makes sense. Those posted silly.
you believe that.
That's my whole goal.
It shouldn't be.
Eventually, somebody will start believing. You want to lead?